Welcome to Movie Oubliette, the film review podcast for movies that most people have mercifully forgotten.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Conrad, and in each episode, we drag a forsaken film out of the oubliette,
Discuss it and judge it to decide whether it should be set free
or whether it should be thrown back and consigned to oblivion forever. Films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie oubliette.
Hello and welcome to episode 36 of Movie Oubliette, the cross-hemisphere film review podcast with me, Dan, proud owner of a recent puppy school graduate, Baxter, in Melbourne, Australia.
Woohoo!
Yes.
And me, Conrad, proud owner of a promotional It Too red balloon in Cambridge, UK.
Oh, you should just place that balloon around the house.
Yeah, I'm frightening my housemates with it. We all float down here.
In this podcast, we discuss overlooked, fantastical films, sci-fi, horror, and fantasy, for the most part, because creepy, man-faced cats, alternate realities, and trusting complete strangers in a bizarre world are the morals we stand by.
Every time.
Yeah. How are you, Conrad?
Oh, unfortunately, I'm not very well.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm coming down with something. So apologies if my voice sounds horrible today. I think it's a bit of a cold I have brewing here. How about you?
Pretty good, pretty good. I swear, Conrad, you never sound bad.
Oh, thank you. No, I will do my best, and hopefully people won't be turning the podcast off in horror.
Oh, no, of course not. Well, any mailbag today, Conrad?
We do. We have some lovely mailbag, including an email from Neil Davis, who said, you mentioned on the Return to Oz episode that the Clockwork Man TikTok was played by Michael Sundin. What you probably didn't realise that he was a Blue Peter presenter. That's a famous BBC children's TV show.
Ah.
And he was a Blue Peter presenter for a year, but he was sacked because he was gay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they were very particular and not very progressive in the 80s, unfortunately. And he unfortunately passed away a year after Blue Peter from an AIDS-related illness. So that's very sad.
That is very sad.
Fascinating trivia. But he also has a bonus vegan tip for me. Apparently, Oreo cookies are vegan. So who says you can't eat bad foods and be vegan at the same time?
Yeah.
Love it. We also had a message from Pat Mack on Facebook, who also suggested Enemy Mine as a possible film for us a while back.
Ah.
And he said that he had never picked up on the mine in the title having anything to do with a working mine.
Yeah. Right.
And he wondered if this could be a film that would be better or worse to see on the big screen.
Yeah, I wonder. Probably not good.
Anyway, Pat said that he could not stop laughing at your take on this being a never-ending story.
Did I say that, though? I don't even recall saying that.
I think you did, yeah. I think you said it felt like it was never going to end.
Well, props to me for coming up with a pun that I didn't even realize.
Wolfgang Peterson pun, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we got some great feedback from lots of different people saying what a great film Enemy Mine is. We had Theodore Salazar said it was a great movie. Can't remember how many times I watched it as a kid. Jeremy Mullen said great movie. Stephen Adarin said brilliant film. Somebody called L Squig said great film, epic in fact.
Oh.
Anthony Membrino said loved it, and Sam Wiley said always underrated in the sci-fi genre. So there's a lot of Enemy Mine love out there.
And I disagree with all of you.
Yeah, so you might not be popular.
No.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
So what have you got for us to look at today? It's your choice this time, I believe.
I'll just go and retrieve it from the oubliette. Okay, I'm over here. Oh, wow. What are these creepy man-faced cats doing here?
Oof, looks scary.
Hang on, I'll just grab this quickly.
Whoa, I'm an important man. I've got a tower.
So what did you manage to rescue from these strange, creepy, man-faced cats?
Well, today we'll be discussing the 2005 Jim Henson production film MirrorMask. Apologies from the last episode when I said this movie was from 2006. It's actually from 2005.
Oh.
So this film was directed by Dave McKean and written by Neil Gaiman, the very, very famous and well-renowned Neil Gaiman, and also Dave McKean as well. I didn't realize Dave McKean is a comic book illustrator and has worked with Neil Gaiman on a number of his works.
Oh, right.
And that's why this movie has that very distinct style. So this film stars Stephanie Leonardis, Jason Barry, Rob Brydon, Gina McKee, Dora Bryan, and also Stephen Fry in a very small role.
Yes, recorded in 20 minutes, I believe.
Oh, right. It is a very small role.
So what's it about?
Part of a traveling circus, teenager Helena gripes with her circus parents wanting to run away and join the real world. However, after her mother collapses one night and requires surgery, Helena is inexplicably thrust into a wondrously MC Escher-like world with sinister human-faced cats, orbiting giants, and, of course, an evil, selfish queen intent on plunging the land in dark shadows. As with every fantasy, Helena must go on a quest to retrieve the coveted charm that will bring balance and restore peace. But is this all a dream in Helena's head? Will she ever return to her reality? Let's decipher the enigma that is MirrorMask.
Ooh, can't wait.
After the break. So we are back to discuss MirrorMask, the 2005 fantasy film directed by Dave McKean and written by Dave McKean and Neil Gaiman. I believe when they first showed this film to one of the studio executives, they described it as Jean Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast on acid for kids. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty accurate summary, really.
Yes, I guess so. It's an odd one because I had never heard of it before. You'd seen it.
I have, yes.
See, I had never even heard of it. And considering the pedigree of the people involved, I mean, certainly Neil Gaiman, who is massively famous for things like Coraline, The Sandman, and Stardust, which is a particular favorite of mine.
I love Stardust, yes.
So good. And he's got a few series running on Amazon Prime, like American Gods. And he did an adaptation of Good Omens, a novel that he co-wrote with Terry Pratchett. So he's huge.
He is.
I'd never heard of Dave McKean before. And it's a Jim Henson production. So there's me all geared up for a big, lavish, Muppety fantasy.
Yes.
And I did not get it, which I was massively disappointed about.
I just do not understand. You think Jim Henson Company, we're going to see puppets. Not one single puppet is in this film because the entire film in the magical world is all CGI.
It is.
100%.
Yes.
And it's a bit of a letdown.
It is, yes. So the Jim Henson Company was going through difficult times. I looked this up, and apparently the Henson family sold the company to a German media conglomerate, EMTV, in 2000, but its stock collapsed.
Oh.
So they reacquired it in 2003. And I guess MirrorMask 2004, 2005, this must be the first project that they did with a comparatively low budget, $4 million, to try to get the company back on its feet again. And they wanted to build on the popularity of The Dark Crystal and The Labyrinth, which were both doing amazingly well on DVD. So they thought, children's fantasy movie, but they decided to do it with no puppets.
Yeah.
I'm just confused.
I know. It's like if an Aardman film came out and there was no claymation.
Yeah.
What were they thinking?
Yeah, it's like, you're Jim Henson. What are you doing? Yeah. So it's very peculiar, especially at the moment. I'm halfway through the new Netflix Dark Crystal series.
I haven't watched it yet.
You haven't
Don't tell me any spoilers.
I won't tell you any spoilers, but it's amazing. I mean, it's just beautifully done.
Oh,
It's
wow.
using all puppets. They've used, obviously, CG to remove the puppeteers and to provide set extensions and amazing visitors. But it's got, it's a really lavish production. And I actually had the opportunity this week to go and see some of the puppets and some of the designs and so on at an exhibition that Netflix put on in the BFI in London. I'll put some pictures up on our social feeds.
Oh, yes. Please do.
Gelflings and fizz gigs and
Oh.
they've really got into what made that whole thing magical and the world that he created, and they've just fully embraced that in 2019. Big, lavish, epic fantasy production with Muppets.
Yes.
And it's great.
Yes.
And then there's MirrorMask. So I was sort of really looking forward to seeing it because I thought, I've never seen this. I've never even heard of it. Bring on the Muppety action, and there's none.
Yeah. It's an interesting choice.
It is.
The approach they took to this, to be 100% CGI. Because when they enter into the magical world, the people are still real. So they've been composited into it.
Yeah.
But it's just so obvious that they're just behind a big blue screen and they're not interacting with anything.
No.
And it really shows. And it kind of just looked like a really long music video.
Right.
Like if you muted the entire movie and you just played your favorite artist's album over it, it would just be a great music video. And I feel like in the music video world, it works because it's just all visuals. There's not a huge amount of storytelling, and it's all just, pretty colors and stuff flying around. But as a movie, it seemed quite muddled visually because there was just so much going on. There wasn't a sense of going on a journey. It was more of a sense of, here's a blue screen landscape that they've just thrown a whole bunch of CGI over.
Yeah.
And here's another blue screen landscape. Like, you didn't feel like they were progressing anywhere. It almost felt like you were watching a stage show. Like, they just turned off the lights and all the people were moving the sets around and they turned them on again and you have a new scene. It's like, we're here now. Because it was filmed pretty much like a stage show because they were filmed in a big, giant blue room. And it was kind of shot like that as well. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah, I watched a lot of the behind the scenes on the DVD that I had, and Dave McKean was going on about how a lot of the people that worked on the film, especially all the animators, were completely just fresh out of university and never worked on a film before. It almost feels like it's like a passion piece. Like it's Dave McKean's first feature film. It's him just trying to figure out how to make a film, really. And he didn't have a lot of money, and he just roped a bunch of animators that had no idea what they were doing and said, let's just make a movie.
Yeah.
Because I heard that all the live action filming and the filming of all the blue screen stuff with the real actors, that was all done in 2 months.
Right.
And then they spent the next 2 years doing all the other CGI stuff
Oh, my.
that went into the film.
Yeah, and didn't he give the artists, instead of having them specialize on, okay, you create characters, you do the compositing, you create the scenes, you create props, instead of delineating that way, he would let the animators take charge of a whole scene and they would do everything in that scene like they were creating a short movie because he felt, just as a creator himself, that would be more satisfying for them.
Yes.
So what you end up with is lots and lots and lots and lots of short films all glued together
Yes.
that have no visual coherence, I don't think.
No, I felt like that. I felt there wasn't a sense of you were in a world. It felt like every scene was another world.
Yeah.
It didn't have the coherence. But in saying that, the visuals were really amazing. Like, you can't deny they were incredible visuals, despite the CGI not being as good as it could have been. If you took a still from any scene in the movie, it would look amazing, as opposed to on your wall.
Do you think so, though?
Yeah, I really do think so. Like, it was oozing Dave McKean's illustration style.
Yeah, that's true.
It had that sort of ink, pencil, almost two-dimensional look to things, even though it was like three-dimensional CGI. But yeah, it was nice to look at, but storytelling-wise, it didn't really work.
Yeah, I don't know. I found, although I could understand that the flat look was governed by the underlying story mechanism, which is that all of these worlds that she's visiting in this fantasy experience, which she could just be asleep and dreaming, they are all based on the drawings that she has on her wall. So
Yes.
our main character, Helena, is an artist, and she has drawn all these weird and wonderful things. And if you looked on her wall, you could see all of them, and even the character of Valentine that she's with for most of the movie is there as well. So that's the motivation behind the flatness of it. But I just thought it was ugly. To me, it looked like a flat, sepia-toned, busy, badly composed. Sometimes it would cut to a shot and I didn't know where I was supposed to look. The 3D animated characters are rudimentary at best in terms of their design, and very low detail in their textures and very simple robotic movements. To me, it looked really like an early 2000s screensaver
Yeah,
for 2 hours. And despite all of the dimensionality, it did just look flat and layered, and I didn't believe that she was there. I didn't believe that she was interacting with any of it. Visually, I just thought it was ugly, and it looked so colourless and sepia-toned, and because they couldn't give you any real depth perception and different focal lengths, it just seemed to have this vignette Gaussian blur sort of smudging all of the layers around the edges. So to me, it looked like a screensaver with Vaseline around the edges of the monitor. And I really didn't enjoy looking at it at all.
I mean, in terms of the time it came out, 2005, it really should have looked better than what it looked.
Definitely.
It kind of looked mid-90s
Yes,
CGI.
that's what I was thinking. I was thinking of The Lawnmower Man from 92.
Yeah, me too.
Had better, more complex characters than this. And that was 10, 12 years before this. So,
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to the fact that the animators working on it were just not experienced animators. It was low budget. They were paid probably pennies. and they just had they were just learning as they went. It must have been a very, very steep learning curve for them to do this movie. And I do feel like it's ambitious as well, because I don't really remember many films coming out in 2005 that had so much CGI.
No.
These days, with all the Marvel movies and pretty much 90% of those movies being completely green screened, it's quite common.
Yes.
But, we are in 2019,
Yeah.
not 2005. So I think things have progressed, and I think they were groundbreaking in even attempting that.
Yeah.
But yes, it did not work. And I found a lot of the footage of the actors in these environments, these CGI environments, because of the lighting that they used to film the actors, they had to change it digitally, and it made it look very digital and flat.
Which is bizarre because it was shot on film, but it's so heavily processed that they do look flat, and there are lens distortions on them that don't match the rest of the scene. So it's just not very well composed at all.
Yes.
And you're right. Yes, in 2019, you're used to these big movies where almost the entire world is being created in a computer, and when the credits roll, the reason that Marvel movies can have 18 mid and post-credit sequences is because the credits are like 20 minutes, because there are thousands of people slaving over this, and then you watch the credits to MirrorMask and they're over in like 2 minutes because there's only sort of 20 people trying to do this. It's ambitious.
It's ambitious.
Doesn't work though.
It just looks like a music video to me.
And a 90s music video.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just a passion piece. It's a first step into feature film territory for Dave McKean. I believe there are only 15 animators.
Right.
And there's some behind the scenes footage of them, and it's just they're using these awful, like almost 90s, like boxy computers trying to animate this, like 15 people in this tiny room. I think they were biting off more than they could chew.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, I think the story is incredibly compelling. The characters are really compelling. I would love to see this film as puppets. Like, I would love to see this Jim Henson style, proper Jim Henson style with puppets and the whole works of practical effects and stuff. But I think there is a whole plethora of other mediums that this film would suit as well. I think of like Coraline. So stop motion
Yes.
would look amazing for this movie as well. I think even 2D animation, there's some behind the scenes footage of some of the storyboards that Dave McKean made for this film, and they look amazing just as storyboards. I would love to see this two-dimensionally animated, but CGI was just the worst choice they could have gone with in terms of trying to convey this on film.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the story, I do take issue with you saying that it's rich and dense and fascinating, because to me, isn't it just Labyrinth with different window dressing? I mean, if I say to you, a young girl who has an active imagination and spends a lot of time being creative and living out fantasies argues with her parents about the responsibilities that they burden her with and her desire for independence, makes a selfish and cruel wish about misfortune befalling one of her family members, and is suddenly, after that comes true, thrust into a fantasy world where she has to restore a family member and makes friends along the way, some of whom reappear in real life when she returns back to her own life.
Yeah.
What does that sound like to you?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of films that sounds like, it sounds like Wizard of Oz to me as well.
Yes.
And it's very, very similar to Return to Oz that we've covered. It's similar to Labyrinth. It's similar to Dark Crystal in terms of going on a quest to find some shard charm thing to restore balance to the world. Yeah, I guess in that respect it is kind of derivative. But I still like to, I have just such a soft spot for movies where, you know, I don't like the real world. I'm going to this fantasy world and meeting all these strange creatures and going on a quest and stuff. I don't know. I still like that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's the classic hero's journey, but this
Yes.
one, I just feel as though they were too obviously trying to recreate the success of Labyrinth, which they admitted themselves.
Yes.
They were even talking about having David Bowie in this movie as the prime minister of the fantasy world, but then they realized that it had to be Rob Brydon because the fantasy world is ruled over by facsimiles of her parents. And there's a moment in it where somebody's manipulating a collection of crystal balls, very much like David Bowie's character, the Goblin King, does in Labyrinth. And of course, you've got that moment where somebody leaps out in front of her and says, "You shall not pass unless you answer a riddle." And I just thought, okay, so here's the Sedidimus scene. But the problem that I have is that, okay, the hero's quest, the whole Campbell hero with 1,000 faces thing, you could apply it to anything. But this is so specifically similar to Labyrinth with a female protagonist of that age. And there are so many specific echoes back to that film. And then it's just cluttered up with a lot of stuff that you can tell is sort of wildly imaginative and fascinating. But none of it really hangs together. None of it really makes sense. And in terms of giving you characters that you can relate to and you fall in love with, like Labyrinth, Ludo and Sedidimus and Hoggle, and you like Sarah, even though she's a bit of a petulant cow at the beginning, to be honest. Let's be frank. But it's Jennifer Connelly. You can't help but fall in love with her as the film progresses. But this one, do you feel any particular feelings for these horrible 3D computer animations, or maybe Valentine, because he's wearing a mask throughout that doesn't help particularly? I don't know. I just wasn't given anything to hold on to, and with no story coherence from one scene to the next, was kind of disengaged throughout the whole thing.
I did find it weird that there were characters from, you know, her real life that were being portrayed in this magical world. It's similar to Wizard of Oz, with all the people in her reality being, the lion and the scarecrow and the Tin Man and stuff. But I felt like the characters were less so. Like her dad was just the prime minister of this world that was in one scene and wasn't that important.
No.
I just felt like the alternates of her real life family weren't really, I don't know, replicated in a similar importance in the magical world. So I felt that tie-in was a bit strange. Like there could have been more characters from the real world in the magical world. Like that mime guy, he just gets turned to stone straight away.
Yes, Pingo.
Yeah. So that was kind of strange. Some of the sort of metaphors of the film are quite interesting. How the fact that her mum has, in the magical world, is two people, the good queen and the bad queen. And the bad queen, I guess, is symbolizing her. Does she have cancer? Is that what she has?
Yeah, I think so.
So she's all dark and menacing looking and gothic, very early 2000s gothic. So that was kind of interesting, but yeah, I guess it could have been developed a bit more.
Well, it's the alternative reality was a flourishing city of entertainers. I think that's what they all are. Like Valentine, who's the male character that she spends most of her adventure with, is a juggler, I think.
Yes.
And this world is ruled over by facsimiles of her father and mother, but it's now a place that's under siege from the shadows, with the queen in a coma or dying because of the actions of an evil twin version of Helena who's stolen this vitally important MirrorMask and run away. It's such a gossamer thin metaphor for what's happening in Helena's own life. I mean, if I woke up from this dream, I'd be so disappointed with how unimaginative my brain is in turning my real life dilemmas into a fantasy world.
Yeah, sure.
They don't do anything particularly rich or interesting with the fantasy counterparts of her real life.
I did like the point of, because she was thinking she was dreaming the entire time, but then she finds out every time she passes by a window, she has a glimpse into her real reality, and seeing her be a rebellious teen, start wearing makeup and piercings and ripped clothing and stuff, and being that very angsty teenager and rebelling against her parents and stuff. So
kissing boys and eating chips, I think is what she said.
Yeah, exactly. And it was kind of interesting seeing the fact that she was witnessing herself grow up and not liking that, but like in reality, that's what she would have done if she continued to act the way that she was acting in terms of pushing away her parents and trying to run away from home. I don't know. I found that quite an interesting way of conveying that across.
Yeah, that's true.
And that moment where she's looking at herself and then her, angsty self looks back and sees her. I got kind of shivers. Like it was a chilling kind of moment that, is this real? Like maybe the daughter of the magical land did go into the real world. And I don't know. I felt like that could have been explored even more, but they didn't really touch upon that.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. You're right. I mean, having her go through her teenage phase and for her inner creative, imaginative child being locked in this fantasy world, looking out the windows, powerless, as this evil version of herself destroys her life and her relationship with her parents.
Yeah.
Is quite a good metaphor for what happens to you when you go through that terrible hormone-fueled period of your life.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not developed particularly. It's hinted at in a very interesting way.
I did see an interview with Dave McKean, and he was saying that he was quite inspired by a lot of the silent films that came out in like the 20s and 30s, like especially, what's that director? Méliès?
Oh, right, yeah.
So a lot of his films are very surreal, and they have that kind of, sepia tone sort of vignette look to it. And so he kind of tried to replicate that with the similar color palette, I guess. And also he said that he really loved those silent films because there were lots of visuals and things you didn't really know what they were. Like you were trying to kind of make out all these kind of layers of visuals, and he tried to do that. But in doing that, it just, it made it a little bit muddy.
Yeah.
There was just too much going on.
Yeah, and I was watching it in HD as well, but to me it just looked like an upscaled DVD. It just looked terrible all the time.
Yeah.
Just ugly to look at, which is a shame because Dave McKean's artwork is not ugly. It is Escher-like and scary, some of it quite dark and twisted, but it's not ugly, I don't think. Although I have to say, I think the card that Helena takes to her mother in the hospital, which makes her look like some hideous cross-eyed monster.
Yeah.
It's pretty grim. I'm not sure how that was supposed to make her mother get well soon.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like there was just so much on screen, just lines and little scribbles, and I mean, I know he was trying to convey his style of illustration, but there was just too much.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, and as I said, compositionally, sometimes I didn't know where I was supposed to look, which, should never be the case in any well-composed shot. But the live-action stuff is similarly inept. I mean, from the opening of the movie, it's a scene outside the circus and the mother is selling tickets, and then Pingo takes over because she goes looking for Helena. And you go from this medium close-up of Pingo, who's mute and just whistles and waves his fingers to speak, which must be really irritating. And then you cut from that to a shot of the customer that he's talking to. And it's this really unflattering forehead to chin close-up of this person through the window. And it, A, doesn't match the previous shot. B, is the most hideous composition that you can possibly do to a human being. And the whole scene is ADR'd in post. From that opening scene, I thought, oh my God, what am I in for? This is so inept. This looks like a cheap British movie from the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave McKean did admit that he had never directed a movie before. He'd done short films, but he'd never actually directed actors in any meaningful sense. I think he'd had actors in masks, and he said that he essentially puppeteered them in his short movies. Whereas this is him actually doing the job of a director of actors in scenes. And you can see as the movie progresses that he's sort of learning as he goes, because some of it is a horrible miss and some of it works.
Yeah.
There are some lovely scenes in there.
Yeah, you're right. It did look very amateur in terms of filming, like the live action stuff. It looked low budget.
Yeah.
And it didn't really look like it had even been graded as well. It just looked super raw footage, very grey.
Yes.
Everything looked like it was from, I don't know, EastEnders or something.
Well, exactly, yeah. That's what made me think of Britain in the 80s, because when you look at something like Extro, if you remember that from whichever episode that was, where you suddenly realise, wow, in the 80s, Britain was a dump. Awful place to live. It has to be said, Brighton does not look great in this movie either, especially the block of flats that she's living in. It looks like
it looks
post-war. It looks terrible.
It does. It's just a concrete cube, yes.
That's deteriorating.
Yeah.
It looks like she's living in a war zone. It's terrible.
I do feel like he tried to do the sort of Tim Burton style in terms of like a lot of very wide-angled, almost like fisheye lenses to make everything look a bit bizarre. But that was in the real world. Yeah, I did feel maybe the actors didn't quite give it their all as much as they could have done. Because I love Rob Brydon. I know him from, there's a TV show called Gavin and Stacey.
Oh, yes.
Where he's so good at that as a Welshman.
Glyn, yeah.
And I've seen him in lots of other things as well. And he's incredibly funny.
Yeah.
I think he did all right in this. Like, I wish he had more of a role in the magical world. He was so sidelined.
Yeah, and a better mask as well. He just seems to have two pieces of tinfoil
Tinfoil, yeah.
twisted in front of his face.
Glued on his face. Yeah.
It's terrible. Which is a shame because the design of a lot of the masks is really quite amazing. Like the one that Jason Barry is wearing as Valentine. And it's got this stripe on it that then continues into the makeup on the bottom half of his face, and these tiny eyes and these pyramid-like spikes at the top that's then reflected in his actual hair that's all gelled up into these spikes across the back of his head. And yeah, it's really nice. He didn't enjoy wearing it, apparently. Looking through those tiny eye holes gave him migraines.
Oh, wow, okay.
So he did not have a good time with it. But the design of some of it looks great, and then you've got Rob Brydon with a bit of Bako foil in front of his face. face, which is terrible.
Yeah.
But yes, the performances are good. I mean, in places, I think Stephanie Leonidas does as best as she can while standing on a blue screen stage talking to nothing. She was 21 at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she doesn't look it, does she? She looks sort of,
No.
I would guess sort of 15, 16.
Yeah.
Which I think is what she's meant to be. And then you've got Jason Barry as Valentine, who does reappear in the real world. And he's 33. And
Wow.
not to be rude to him, but he looks 33 to me. He looks like a 30-year-old man. Do you not think so?
I don't think so.
I think
he looks mid-20s to me.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
He was in Titanic. He was Leonardo DiCaprio's best friend in Titanic. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So to me, he looks like a 30-year-old chatting up a 16-year-old. It looks all kinds of wrong to me.
Yeah, in the magical world, I think he looked older than he was supposed to look. Because especially when she has that weird premonition with her mother, and her mother's like, did I dream you were a boyfriend?
Yeah.
And I was like, a boyfriend?
Oof, I hope not.
He looks so much older than her.
Yeah.
That can't be right.
Yeah, but she does meet up with him at the end of the movie in the real world, and that's what we're left with, is the possibility of them having a relationship, which is a bit disturbing.
Yeah.
We should be calling someone. This is not good.
Oh, I found his real world face, like his actual face, looked younger than his mask face.
Right.
I don't know how that works. But
Now it's time for Random Trivia.
So, Dan, what fascinating piece of trivia have you pulled from the Mirror for today's episode?
So this film is a Jim Henson company production. When the studio kind of got involved with this film, Dave McKean and Neil Gaiman got to stay at the Jim Henson house to kind of continue writing and kind of finalizing the script for this film. And there's like a panel, I think, at Comic-Con, and Dave goes on about how it was really strange staying at the house because Jim Henson, he loved his work, so there were just Muppets everywhere.
Right.
Dave was saying that if you squinted in the drawing room, it looked like this kind of classical Edwardian drawing room. But once you kind of focused on what you were looking at, you would see, instead of a Degas painting, it was Miss Piggy in a in a tutu, or like another painting with like Kermit the Frog on a swing or something. So it was like a really, I guess, a really surreal time that I had just staying in this house.
Oh, I would love to see that.
Yeah, me too.
I bet that was fun. And that's our trivia.
Well, I guess we should really talk about the score for this film. What did you think of the progressive, easy listening jazz?
Right, okay. Knives Out. Sorry, I hated this. I thought it was terrible. It was off to a bad start from the opening titles, which to me sounded like a drum machine falling down the stairs while a saxophonist warmed up in the corner. It just sounded awful. There's just random drum beats popping up. I suppose it's very sort of 2000 techno easy listening, where instead of maintaining some sort of steady rhythm, there'll be a kick. Then half an hour later, 36 percussion instruments all jangling together at once, and then silence for another half an hour. And meanwhile, just random woodwind noodling over the top of really amateurish synthesizer stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of layered over the whole movie with no sense of drama or emotion or pace. Behind it, it does nothing to enhance the scenes. It's just sort of laying there like somebody left an easy listening CD on that you have in a spa or something.
Sure.
Kenny G for your meditation session.
Wow.
It's just awful. And then when it gets to the dramatic part of the movie towards the end, he is leaning very heavily on a sample CD called Symphonic Adventures, which was a loop library that was created by East West in 2002. And I recognize it because it was used on everything, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the X-Files around that time, to give
Okay.
synthesizer scores more of a sense of symphonic weight behind them. But also I used it myself on my first film score. So, I'm
Right.
just as guilty in the early 2000s of being given the task of creating an orchestra and just falling back on this loop library. But yes, I know that Ian Bellamy is a friend of Dave McKean's and a very talented saxophonist. But I hated his score for this movie. I'm sorry.
I don't understand why they thought intellectual jazz, I would call it, was a good idea for a children's fantasy film.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to have something different.
It is. It's not your usual orchestral fantasy score. I think there were some elements of the score that was effective. Some of the kind of more dreamy sequences that kind of worked. But it just oozed a sense of kind of pretentiousness that shouldn't be in a film like this.
Yeah.
It's music that 50-year-old men that like jazz would listen to. And it's not the sort of music that you should have in a kid's fantasy film.
No.
And I did find the music was way too happy.
Yeah.
It should have been a little bit darker, like a little bit more foreboding.
No, you're quite right.
A lot of the music was just too sparkly and far too much saxophone. I love saxophone, but far too much in this movie.
I guess if you're going to go with a saxophonist for your composer, you're going to end up with far too much saxophone. But yeah, no, it just doesn't lend the film with any kind of drama or threat.
There were a few scenes, especially I'm thinking of that kind of music box scene where Helena is getting dressed by these music box marionette puppets, and the scene is accompanied by Close to You, the Burt Bacharach song, but it's been covered in a way that's very bizarre. It's got these reharmonizations with the vocals, and it's kind of music boxy, and I think that really works. Watching that scene again, I love it. I love that scene. I remember loving it when I first watched it, and watching it again, still an effective scene.
It is, yeah. To have a Carpenter's classic like Close to You turned into something that's vaguely disturbing is quite an achievement, I think.
Yeah.
The Swedish singer Josephine Kronholm, who provides the vocals, did a really good job with some very difficult harmonizations from the sound of it, because they are not the chords that you're expecting as that song progresses.
No. Yeah. She is a Swedish jazz singer. I think she's a friend of Ian Bellamy's.
Right, okay.
And I don't know what it is with all those Scandinavian singers. They have such a strange tone to their voices.
Yeah.
Like I think of Björk, and there's a band called The Do. The singer in that is like Finnish, I think. They all have such a strange timbre to their voice that is so alluring.
Yes, and it's across the whole of Scandinavia as well. I remember Gollum's song at the end of Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, which is performed by Emiliana Torrini.
Oh, yeah, I love her.
Yes.
She sang that? That's amazing.
Yeah, and she also has that sort of strange, mystical, but delicate and fragile. I don't know. I can't describe it. It's just an amazing tonal quality that they have that I just love.
I really wish they'd utilized Josephine's vocals in the score as more of an element throughout the film, rather than just like that one song and the credits, and that was it.
Yeah.
Because less saxophone, that's what I say.
Yeah, less saxophone, more Josephine, I think, definitely. That gets my vote as well. Because it could have been sort of the voice of Helena in some way. It's such a film that is led by a female perspective, and the big bad in the movie is her mother, and also the dark side of herself. I mean, it's such a fascinating exploration of that, or it could have been. I think having a stronger female presence on the score would not have been a bad thing.
Exactly. I also felt that there could have been more metaphors in the magical world as well. Like, what was the reason for the flying fish? What was the reason for the monkey birds? Like, what was the reason for the cats with man faces? I have no idea what they kind of symbolize. They were just like weird for the sake of being weird.
Yeah.
So many things could have been explored a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how a kid is supposed to enjoy this, to be honest. As a child's fantasy, it's pretty grotesque, most of it, and quite disturbing. The level that the movie's pitched at, I don't understand at all, because the comedy is so childish, and yet the concepts behind what they're saying are so adult that it doesn't work for a child or for an adult.
Yeah.
It's like when Valentine bemoans the loss of his juggler friend, who turns into stone right at the beginning and says he will never be forgotten, and then dismisses it with an well. That's a very Pyrrhic punchline that a kid would find funny if it were delivered with a little bit more pace and snap to it,
Yeah.
more exaggerated. But it doesn't work. And then Helena comes back and says, had you known him long? And Valentine says, who?
Right.
So it's doubling down on what's a lame joke to begin with and takes far too long over it. And it's slightly morbid. So I don't know. It doesn't work for kids. It doesn't work for adults. I don't know who it's for.
Yeah, I think when I first watched this movie, so I was in my mid-20s when I watched this film, all my friends loved it. Everyone was talking about it
Really?
and saying, oh, this is a great movie, MirrorMask, you gotta watch it. And I kind of feel like that's the demographic.
Right.
So 20-year-olds. I think 20-year-old art students
Right.
would love this film.
Right.
So
okay.
you're at the age where you're just appreciating visuals and sort of art for art's sake rather than something that's compelling as a piece of narrative, I guess. And you're not a kid, but you're not a mature adult that can critique cinema in the way that we do. So yeah, it's kind of like face value type of movie. I do think the visuals are great in this film. Yeah, they are a bit ugly and tonally just not aimed well, but I do think the visuals are great. You can see the creative intent of McKean. He just doesn't convey it. And the team that he had, the budget that he had, it just didn't come across. Despite the film not really working, I would love to watch more of his movies, and he has done 2 feature films since, Luna and The Gospel of Us. I have no idea whether they're good movies, but I would like to watch them. I like his artistic style, but yeah, just wasn't executed that well in this movie.
Well, Luna was reviewed very well when it premiered at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival in 2014. So by all accounts, that marries computer animation and a weird alternative fantasy world with a real-world trauma. And again, starring Stephanie Leonidas, obviously a little bit older.
Oh, right.
So could be
Yeah.
an interesting one to visit after watching MirrorMask, for sure.
Because I do feel that he does incorporate childhood trauma into a lot of his stories and illustrations. He has a very dark sensibility, and I think this film could have gone darker, to be honest. I think they could have taken it a step further, and it could have just been one of those movies that terrifies kids when they're young.
Yeah, not with the Kenny G soundtrack.
No.
Coming to you live from the movie Oubliette Theatre, it's the prestigious Mobley Awards.
So, listeners, I'm sure you're all peacefully dreaming about your favourite segment of the pod, the Mobley Awards, where we pluck our favourite parts of the film in a number of bizarrely comforting categories.
Best quote.
So my favourite quote came from the letter that evil Helena wrote to her mother just before she ran away, or after she ran away. And she says that in order to escape, she's going to use the MirrorMask. And she says, it may upset things a bit, but you can't run away from home without destroying somebody's world.
Very profound.
Which I thought was, that's clever, because it's working on 2 different levels. Because by stealing the MirrorMask, she throws her whole world out of balance and sets off the shadows that are consuming it all. But it also plays in terms of reality, in terms of if you run away from home, I think your parents do get rather upset.
Yes, they certainly do. My favourite quote was from Helena as well. It's actually at the start of the film when she's complaining about, I don't want to be in the circus anymore, I don't want to juggle, and her mum's trying to convince her, no, you have to go on stage. And then she says, I want to run away and join real life. And it's just such a nice kind of flip on the whole, the saying of, I just want to run away and join the circus. It's like, no, not for Helena.
No, she's there already. She wants to run away and just get a job as a bank manager or something.
Yeah, just pay taxes,
Sit in traffic.
Most naughty moment.
I didn't find anything that naughties about this film. I was going to say like the CGI, but the CGI kind of looked 90s. So
Yes,
it was really hard to
That's
pick.
exactly what I've written.
That's so funny.
If it reminds me of anything from the noughties, it reminds me of full motion video adventure games like Myst that people used to play on their PCs
Yeah, sure.
in the early noughties. But when you're saying that of a major motion pictures special effects, that's not great. Is
No,
it?
not great.
Best hair or costume?
Well, I didn't have a favourite hair or costume, but in terms of costume, I did find it rather amusing that the evil version of Helena is dressed the way an adult thinks a wayward girl would dress, but in the 1980s. So she has these orange and green luminous fishnet sleeves with rips in them, giant hoop earrings, and massively overproducted hair that's going in all different directions. She looks like a backing dancer from an 80s Madonna video.
She really does. It's what adults think like rebellious teens dress, just like 80s punks.
Yeah. What about you?
I mean, my favorite costume, I guess it was more an effect, but you've mentioned it. Valentine. I really loved his mask. You couldn't really see where the mask began and ended because his mouth was real, but then his chin beard was kind of part of the mask. And then you could see the back of his head, and that was real hair, but then there was also the mask here. It was, just really great design.
Yeah, that's probably the best realised character in the whole movie. Yeah, certainly better than Rob Brydon with his Baker foil.
Yeah. They obviously ran out of budget at that stage. Just search the kitchen drawer.
Favorite scene?
My favorite scene, I have already mentioned it. It's the Close to You music box dressing Helena like a goth scene.
Right.
It was so great. It's just so creepy and just so succinct. Creepy, but really kind of beautiful at the same time. And just an amazing arrangement of that song.
Yeah, that song really is a highlight in the soundtrack for sure.
And for you, Conrad?
I did not have a favourite scene. I didn't enjoy any of them. So possibly the ending titles, because then I knew it was over. But then the ending titles had this sort of sickening wavy distortion effect on them that made you feel like you were going to hurl. So yeah, I didn't even like those either. So
Wow.
Most cliched fantasy moment.
there are so many obvious things to say for fantasy cliche. There's the quest for the magical object, but I think possibly the one that bugs me the most is it was all a dream.
Oh, yeah.
Because she goes to sleep at the beginning and she wakes up at the end. And
I mean, I would say, the quest for the charm, but also in a lot of fantasy films, it's a quest for something that turns out to be something completely different. So you think it's a charm, like some sort of jewel, but of course it's a mirror mask, which she retrieves by shoving her face into a mirror. And that's how you get it back. I mean, I did kind of like that the mirror mask being, I guess, your worst version of yourself, yourself that you see through the mirror that is not you, I guess. I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Favorite special effect?
I had no favourite special effect in this movie. I thought they were all uniformly terrible. And I understand the limitations of the budget and the resources of the time, but for 2005 to have special effects that are below the par of the Lawnmower Man, it's not good. I'm sorry.
Right. I mean, I quite liked the scene with the key tower. The tower that looked like the key that she had. It looked cool. It was just this huge kind of bulbous, suspended structure in the air that was very Dali-esque / Escher-esque. I thought it was kind of great design, but I guess not it was a special effect because it was all CGI, so everything was an effect.
It was, yeah.
Best sound effect.
Mine is actually a moment of sound design that I really like, and it's the scene right at the end of the movie where Helena is waiting to hear the news of whether her mother has gotten through the surgery okay. She's watching her father, who's turned his back to her, and he's on the phone, and she's just looking up at him, and all the sound sort of becomes really muffled and quiet, apart from her breathing and her saying under her breath, "Please let it be okay, please let it be okay." And it's such a great way of recreating what it felt like for that character at that moment. Dave McKean said on the commentary that it actually came from the ADR sessions, because in the monitoring booth, that's all he could hear. The soundtrack of the movie was really quiet and muffled, and she was really amplified in the recording booth. And he just thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm just going to put this in the soundtrack exactly like this, because it really creates a special moment. So I really liked that. I thought that was a great piece of sound design.
Yeah, it was a good choice. My favorite sound in the film was the eyeball spiders that the evil Helena's mum was just throwing around. The way they move, it sounded like kind of glassy, metallic tapping clinks. Sometimes when I listen to sound design in films and it's such a crystal clear sound, it just gives me so much joy.
Most funniest scene.
Okay, none. So I didn't laugh once.
Really?
I didn't even laugh at the movie. It didn't even engage me enough to engage my scorn. So no laughter at all.
Wow.
How about you?
I love the scene where Valentine eats the future fruit and he sees his future self put on the mirror mask and be transported into the real world, and you see his face for the first time, his real face, and he's for some reason a waiter at a restaurant. And then he wakes up from this vision and he just exclaims, "No, I don't want to be a waiter." I don't know, I think I've worked in hospitality quite a lot, and so I feel that pain. I can feel it.
Right. It is the fate of a lot of Kiwis and Australians in London, it has to be said.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the entirety of the waiting staff, actually.
And
Okay.
that's our Movie Award.
It is.
And we are back to present our final verdicts for MirrorMask, the 2005 fantasy film. Should this film be allowed to run free in the real world as a naughty's rebellious teenage girl? Or should MirrorMask be dressed by a dozen slightly morbid music box puppets and be plunged into the dark shadows of the Oubliette?
Ooh.
Well, Conrad, I am pretty sure I know what you think, but please.
Yes, no, I don't believe MirrorMask should be set free from the Oubliette. Despite my excitement about watching this, I'd never heard of it. It was a Jim Henson production with Neil Gaiman writing, with a promising cast. I thought, I'm looking forward to another Muppety fantasy adventure with a slightly dark, Gaiman-y twist to it. And I got this horrible noughties screensaver with a Kenny G soundtrack that made no sense whatsoever. And when it did narratively make sense, it was heavily derivative of Labyrinth and was so obviously just an attempt to recreate that and make some money. And I just think, bottom line, if you're the Jim Henson Company, make a film with Muppets in it, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
That's your unique selling proposition opposition. Why the hell do this with terrible computer graphics that were at least 10 years old? I can appreciate the creativity behind it. I can appreciate the intent. I think that all of the artists involved are really great artists. I love Dave McKean's artwork. But the film was ugly, unengaging, and I was bored. I'm sorry. So I say no, not even as a curiosity. I say definitely not. But I have a feeling that you feel differently about it.
Yeah, watching it now, it has not held up as much as I thought it has. The CGI has dated tremendously. It is so inadequate in conveying what should be a really good story.
Yeah.
I did think it was a bit derivative now, watching it again. But I do think there is so much artistic intent. And it is just a passion piece, I guess. It was a low budget. Let's see if we can make this film passion piece. And it just didn't quite succeed. A little bit too ambitious. I would love to see this in a different medium.
Yeah.
CGI was not a good choice.
No.
I do think it still is something to check out. I don't think many people will enjoy this movie, but I do think it is something that has the intent. And I would free this film from the Oubliette. It sounds preposterous, considering what I've just said, all my reservations for this film. But I still think there is the creative intent there. I do think it's enough.
Well, I guess it's yet another time for us to use
The coin of fate.
Serge was tweeting me yesterday saying that he was listening to the Enemy Mine episode on the train and he was chanting, "Coin of fate, coin of fate."
That's amazing.
He was imagining everyone on the train joining in.
So they should be. I'll do the honors.
Are you doing heads or tails?
I think you should pick this time.
Well, I was lucky with heads last time, so I'm going to go for tails.
Okay, here we go. It's heads.
Oh, no! There goes my winning streak.
So be free.
I'm gonna run away and join real life. Bye.
Be a rebellious 80s/noughties teenage girl.
With special effects from the 90s.
Well, Conrad, what are we going to be doing next time?
So we're staying in the 2000s, but we're travelling across the Atlantic to Canada to watch our very first werewolf movie with the 2000 horror film Ginger Snaps.
Oh, I have to admit, I haven't seen enough werewolf movies, so this will be a good one for me.
Yeah, and it's led by a female cast, so we still have our female protagonists.
Great.
Yeah, it's directed by John Fawcett and starring Emily Perkins and Catherine Isabel and Mimi Rogers as well as the mum, if I remember rightly. So
Right.
should be interesting.
Thanks, listeners, for joining us on this journey into bad CGI. But if you would like to follow us on our journey, we are on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Movie Oubliette. And you can email us at movie.oubliette@gmail.com.
Yes.
We love all your feedback.
Yes, so please do let us know what you think of MirrorMask and also, yes, anything you have to say on Ginger Snaps as well. We're looking forward to watching that and talking about it with you. If you like the show, please take the time to rate and review us on whichever podcast platform you're using to listen to us on, and consider becoming a patron on Patreon.
Yes.
For as little as $1, you can suggest movies for us to cover on the show, and for $5, you can get access to lots of bonus additional material, including lengthier discussions with our special guests. So there's lots of fun stuff in there now to listen to.
Yeah, we have had quite a few guests on the show, so why not go back and listen to some of our early episodes. I recently actually watched the beginning of VHS, because our guest David Bruckner directed one of the segments on that, which I just watched.
He did,
and it was amazing.
It's far and away the best segment in VHS, I think. Controversial. Yes, and I think he's currently working on episodes of the new Creepshow TV series.
Oh,
That's
wow.
exciting.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's it, listeners. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie Oubliette.
What if it was the chicken?